She dragged herself from the grit with barely a shred of fabric hanging off her frame, clinging like a whisper to her battered skin. Her face was puffed up, her mouth was cracked wide, her limbs quivered so fiercely that the parched ground quaked under her knees. Anyone catching sight of her right then would never guess she'd once been lured with whispers of a fresh start. She seemed less a newlywed and more a fighter, holed raw from the depths of despair. The blaze overhead in Cheyenne scorched without mercy. Its fire pounded her battered back as she lurched over the wide meadow, dropping a thin smear of crimson in her wake. Her name was Emma Harlow, just 22, and she'd trekked westward with a valley stuffed with hopes. But the fellow who'd sent her for a wife hadn't even paused 10 breaths before twisting those hopes into horror. Harlan Croft, keeper of the rowdiest tavern in these parts, a soul that townsfolk dreaded, and rightly so. When Emma crossed his threshold, gripping her journey docs and the note he'd penned, she still held on to the notion that mercy might linger out here, that a brighter tomorrow was just ahead. Instead, Harlan chuckled right in her face the instant he laid eyes on her. Then he yanked her bag from her grasp. Then he slammed her against a beam. Then, before a cluster of 6 sloshed patrons, he shredded the gown she'd scrimped for seasons to afford. He branded her worthless, he dubbed her deceitful, he labeled her chattel that fell short of his demands. When she pushed back, even with unsteady fists, his grin turned razor-edged. He hauled her to the tavern's rear, he pummeled her till she couldn't rise. Harlan didn't strike from fury alone. He'd glimpsed the portrait from the matchmaker's post, a lovely lass in a silk frock, and Emma bore no resemblance. The second he grasped the swindle, he unraveled. He stripped her garb to humiliate her before his crew, bellowing that she was a fraud dispatched to dupe him, unworthy of the silver he'd shelled out. No soul dared intervene, for Cheyenne's people learned quick not to tangle with a Harlan Croft, not unless they craved missing the dawn's glow. He booted her ribs till the flesh tore, and as she pleaded for mercy, he bundled her in a grimy rag and commanded his boys to dump her beyond the settlement like discarded refuse. He craved her stripped of pride, stripped of shelter, stripped of any shot at reckoning. By the hour they hauled her past the outskirts, Emma could scarce cling to awareness, her form racked by jolt and agony. That's how Emma Harlow wound up solitary on the Montana Badlands, seeping blood, shoeless, reeling, teetering on the brink beneath a torment she couldn't name. Each inhale scorched, each stride smeared, yet she inched onward, quaking bit by bit because halting spelled death there in the soil where Harlan Croft had abandoned her. She blacked out more than once crossing those flats, rousing each spell with parched lips and breaths too frail. But terror tugged her on when her legs faltered. Each awakening, she'd scrabble toward the closest sliver of shadow, clutching a fragile spark that some wanderer might drift near before the blaze claimed her. The expanse sprawled endless every way, rippling in the haze. Her sight wavered, her joints gave way. She murmured pleas, but silence replied. Not yet. Not till her vigor utterly failed, and her frame crumpled by the rail of a spread she couldn't place. Her face mashed to the earth, her nails scraped the loam, her gaze rose to a far-off shape astride a mount. The first soul she'd spotted since the thrashing. A spread hand, seasoned, rugged, eyeing her with a dazed stare, as if he couldn't fathom the shattered form sprawled there was flesh and blood at all. And right then Emma faced a fork. Squander her last gasp on a cry for help, or surrender to the void. If you were that spread and stumbled on a lass pinching your way in naught but a ragged scrap, marked, oozing, scarcely clinging to breath, what would you do? Jack Harlan hadn't figured on spotting a living thing out that dawn, let alone a slip of girl huddled in the muck, clad in a frayed remnant that might flutter apart on a gust. He swung down from his pony and eased a handful of paces nearer, spurs grinding the brittle turf with a rhythmic snap. Emma strained to heave herself up, but her elbows folded and she tumbled back with a faint keen that came out more sigh than sound. Jack dropped to one knee by her side. He'd patched wounded stock afore, even a smattering of fellows mulled fierce in tavern scraps, but zilch like this. Her flesh blazed feverish, her jaw was gouged bare, and as he brushed her arm to ease her onto her back, she recoiled, like bracing for fresh blows. He held his tone hushed, near tender. "Miss, you with me?" Her mouth quivered. She peered up, gaze brimming with ache and dread, and for a beat, Jack sensed a knot clench in his gut. Not sorrow, something weightier. She labored to form words, but they snagged. Then she raised her palm and clamped it to her flank. Jack traced her stare and spied the gash, a ragged slash, bruised violet at the rims, puffed and raw. She breathed it out in a thread so faint he near overlooked it. It's too vast. The gash, the torment, the full ordeal she had endured. Her digit slid and she pitched ahead. Jack snared her ere she struck soil. She latched onto his collar like clutching the last thread of existence in her veins. "Please, don't haul me back to the Berg. Please." Jack felt that knot yank tighter now. He grasped her drift spot on. Berg meant menace. The kind where brutes like her assailant didn't quit until the frail one shattered, and might yet lurk to snag her slipping right into their clutches. Jack fetched the weathered pony rug lashed aft his saddle and laid it soft over her trembling form. It was coarse, gritty, reeking of hide, but it cloaked her better than the tattered rag she gripped. The weave engulfed her slight build, and for a first she'd struck me less specter, more mortal. Jack scooped her up in his hold. She weighed scant, too scant, the kind born of starvation and fright and endless sleepless darks. His mount fidgeted as if tasting the shift in the breeze. Even the gust appeared to hold its breath. "Hang in there. I'm bearing you back." "You're secure alongside me, for the nonce." He hadn't cradled anyone this near since the ague stole his missus 15 winters past, and he'd sworn off it forevermore. Emma gave a feeble dip of her chin, her temple nestling to his breast. But as Jack bore her toward the homestead, he couldn't shake the hunch that her tormentor wasn't through, and he was spot on. For the instant Emma breached his stoop, the fiend who'd wrecked her days caught when she yet drew breath, and he was already inbound. Jack ferried Emma into the weathered homestead as soft as a soul with roughened palms could contrive. The spot was still save for the lazy talk of the mantel timepiece and the faint groan of planks neath his heels. He settled her on the modest settee by the pane, where the midday glow spilled mild over her features. The same grips that once toted a musket through eastern strife now bore a near-gone gal who'd wronged him none. Jack ducked into a snug chamber and emerged with a faded chore blouse. Frayed gentle by sunlit seasons, he placed it nigh her and pivoted away, granting her the honor she'd been robbed of. She struck so tender then, too tender to have weathered what she'd just clawed through. Her lids parted. She drew the neckline to her throat like it was the sole haven left in her realm. Jack ladled spring water into a battered mug, then hunkered by her. "Here, take this easy. It'll ease you." She strove. Her fingers shook so he braced the vessel for her. When she drained it, she loosed a gust that wobbled like a snapped cord. For a drawn spell, she just fixed on the plaster, like weighing if she merited this plane any more. Jack eased onto his haunches. He didn't prod. He'd gleaned ages back that souls unburdened when primed, not a tick sooner. At length, Emma murmured, "He stripped me bare, my garb, my grip, my coin, my deeds. He cackled through it all. There was a weary ire in her timber, the brand forged from countless petty wounds heaped on one already scant." Jack hearkened firm as rock as she spun the yarn of Harlan Croft, the lashing, the rent frock, the hurl from the hamlet like offal. Jack's mandible clenched. He'd never warmed to that tavern brute. Now he bore a grudge etched soul deep. Emma flinched and palmed her flank. Jack probed the rent anew, dousing it with tepid spring, inching deliberate so she'd not jolt when she shuddered. He tugged a fresh throw from the pine chest in the nook and draped her shoulders. "There now. Cozier, eh? You doze. I'll fret the balance." For the first, she locked eyes with him. Her tone was reedy but sure. "If he tracks me, I'll not outlast it." Jack held her stare. "Then he won't unearth you here, not whilst I draw air."
Afield, the zephyr stirred, the stock milled in the pen, the ether hung thicker, like the turf itself sensed peril inbound. Jack lingered at the casement, scanning the rutted track snaking to the burg. He knew Harlan wouldn't yield light. Thugs like him never did. And this was mere the prelude. If you'd trail the tale's tail, don't hesitate to sign on. It counts more than words. Snag your mug of brew, nestle down, and share. What's the hour there for you just now? And from what corner are you tuning in? Jack caught no wink that eve. He perched by the pane with the lantern dimmed, eyeing the rutted path like it might murmur secrets. Every rustle doubled his glance, a nag whickering in the yard, the breeze sighing over the slats. Even the house's faint sigh of settling clamped his jaw anew. Near midnight, Emma's heat surged. She tossed faint under the throw, crying aliases he couldn't place, imploring some phantom to cease. Jack daubed a chilled rag to her brow and breathed the lone balm that rose. He can't touch you here, lass, not this dark. In the tight nook, Emma dozed ragged. Now and then she'd mule, her fist bunching his blouse like fearing it would vanish on release. Jack peered in time and again, each pass drawing the throw to her collar so the gloom and chill spared her. Near daybreak, she rose, her murmur scarce carried. Was it a fancy, or am I truly shielded here? Jack drew a stool alongside and sank into it. You're shielded for the moment, but we've got a gale galloping our trail. That gale blew swifter than he dreaded. Past noon, the hounds in the dooryard set to yapping, not their chummy yap, the alert one. Jack strode out, and yonder the barrier loomed Harlan Croft astride a lanky, ebony steed. A pair of his roughnecks bookended him. Their mugs might have been hewing from wrath. Jack knew this was but the courteous call, for a cur like Harlan never rode solo when scheming true woe, and he'd have heaps more brawn boozing in his den. Harlan doffed his lid in a languid jeer and arc. "Mornin', Jack! Words you snagged off that's mine." Jack held fast on the veranda. This turf was his code, his furrow in the clay. She ain't yours. She's wounded and she's spooked, and she ain't budging with you. Harlan barked a guffaw, sharp as shattered crockery. "Jack, easy now. A gal ventures this remote with my missive clutched. She's in my debt."
That's the bargain. Jack took a lone stride from the stoop. Just one, yet it sufficed to twitch Harlan in his seat. Not here it don't. Not on my ground. Harlan slit his gaze. Figure a lone blouse and a single dusk on your settee claims her for you? I shelled for a mate, and I mean to reap. Within, Emma caught his timber. She hauled herself bolt upright, but her pins folded the instant she sought footing. Jack steadied her with a palm, inching her to the lintel till she could prop there sans toppling. Harlan spied, and the smirk blooming on his kisser set Jack's veins afire. There she be. Come on, Emma, spare us the fuss. Emma shook her crown, terror strangling her speech. Her voice hung faint, but she wrung it free regardless, more for her steel than his ears. You hold no claim on me, Harlan Croft. Jack edged afore her, screening her from sight. She bides. That's dandy. For a stretched hush, none uttered. The yard hushed. Even the nags quit milling in the pen. Harlan held no mirth this round. He merely bored into Jack with a glare bent on searing clean through. He was a tyrant, not dim, and even curs like him shied from sparking a shootout on a spread man's turf sans reinforcements. He knew, too, Jack hadn't outlasted the strife on chance alone, and neighboring hands would rally if gore flowed. But the ether had altered, and he tasted it likewise. Emma wasn't the splintered waif he'd flung to the muck yesterday. Not any more. Not with a steadfast soul barring their path who flinched not. Harlan wrenched his leads.
His mount pawed the dirt. Antsy. He flicked a peek round the broad meadows, the homestead, the posts, the serene grace of the spread itself. Plain this realm wasn't his, nor the gal fisting Jack's blouse astern. He hawked into the grit, a crisp snap, a vexed one. Then he cracked his leads and wheeled his pony roadward. His roughs trailed befuddled, peering back like awaiting a cue unborn. Harlan spared not a backward peek. When the haze at last cleared, Jack exhaled the gust he'd pent. Emma slumped against the jam, clutching her neckline like dreading the globe's fresh grasp. It was done, at least for the span, and both sensed a pivot. Not haven yet, but the initial wee stride thereto. The whisper of the ranch dust-up didn't linger panned. By Harlan's return to Cheyenne, tongues were wagging. A drover from a flanking spread had glimpsed Jack toting a young thing indoors, swathed in a top not her own, her visage marred and her gait wobbly. The image raced quicker than post. That eve, the lawman ambled into Harlan's den and found it muted beyond norm. A duo Harlan's crew had vanished, their seats bare, their mugs yet perched on the scarred wood. None craved sip and flank to a soul who'd thrash a lass nigh to ruin over a snapshot and a vow. The lawman held no roar, he needed none. He just palmed the rail and drawled soft, so every straggler caught it clear. You graze that gal again, or Jack Harlan, and I'll bunk you in a hole so pitch you'll lose the taste of sun. Harlan essayed to chuckle, but it rang hollow. Dread had muzzled Cheyenne long. Now that dread wheeled on him. Afield on his claim, Jack spied a fodder mound stomped asunder, a stretch of barrier snipped in shadow. Tiny barbs that crossing a Harlan croft exacts a toll in purse and morrow. In a fortnight, a brace more hands bailed his outfit. Over ensuing moons, his den brimmed with haze and strains, but the glee frayed at the hams. Lads still trickled for his firewater, but they quit clapping his shoulder so brisk, and their glances shied from his longer. If he hunkered, it'd never quite mirror the burg of old for him. Not with Emma Harlow still inhaling, and the raw facts of his deeds striding bold in the open. The spans after unspooled, languid, and kind. Jack stuck nigh the hearth, mending the stoops bar, ear in the herd, and sure and Emma saw him each time her gaze lifted from the settee. She regarded him with a melt in her eyes he'd not marked ere. Not the melt of wooing, something meeker. The melt of one at last granted heir. Later that span, a cart rumbled by the spread, bound burgward. A pair of kirk dames perched aft, hampers of broods on their skirts. They hailed Jack. One tipped her nod to Emma via the flung casement, and no scorn lit her brow. Sole fret, sole grace. That wee instant schooled Emma truer than any tin star. Folks credited her. Folks beheld the verity. Jack whipped her a plain repast, stock, toasty loaf. Nothing burdensome. She supped deliberately, fingers yet trembling, but each draught felt like reclaiming a shard of her core. Dawn by dawn, her color returned, and the throb in her ribs softened from a fierce howl to a muted pang she could bear. The meadow blooms edging the rail had bloomed and faded by the hours she could perch their sands, wincing at each wheeze. One dusk, as the orb sank and brushed the vault with amber, Emma ventured out with Jack, propped on his elbow, for stead. They stopped by the barrier, gazing over the pastures. The breeze sighed mild past him this round, no menace, soul calm. Emma broke the quiet, her timbre hushed but firm. I reckoned heading west would gift a reborn path. I never fathomed I'd claw to endure one first-a-most. Jack eyed her, the deep, fatigued grace in his gaze. Sometimes that's the West's weave out here. The soil claims its cut, but it yields a return, too, if you yield to it. Emma dipped her chin, her eyes brimming, not dread, but ease. Grateful for trusting my word, grateful for barring him from claiming me. Jack wagged his head. No debt of thanks. You just craved a leg up to rising new. That's the sum of it. And you're claiming it this instant. They lingered till the sun's tail waned behind the crest. Two once strange souls, now knit by woe, by grit, and by a plain verity, and that sufficed. Sometimes virtue ain't boomed. Sometimes it's just a grizzled spread hand pouring his dregs to spare one fractured lass from melting into the haze. That gloamin', Jack left the scattergun primed over the transom. Not because he hunted strife, because he knew some brutes never quit. So, reckon this. If you filled Jack's spurs, would you have waded in when a lass with nothing but a ragged scrap craved aid? Would you stake your quiet for the straight path? And if Emma fronted you now, would you swear her yarn ain't wrapped and she merits a stab at brighter days? If this yarn nudged you a touch, don't shy from tapping like. It helps more than said. And if yarns of metal, grace, and fresh shot stir you, sign on ahead so the next weave never slips your can.